So we'll go from here. Thanks. Over to you, Nicole.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Thank you, Nicole, for sharing that short video. It will be available as a link on the chat box for those who want to look at it again. I think we're going to go over to a new slide. Okay, great. I do see that we have participants still joining, but because we've only got an hour, which is really not a long time, I am going to kick off the webinar, and welcome to those that have already joined. This is the second webinar on the critical role of leadership in organizational mental health. I would especially like to thank our panel of executives who represent the Banking Association of South Africa, ABSA, and Uber, who have joined us today in this very important conversation. We're also very grateful to have Dr. Sabanda, who is a clinical psychologist, join our webinar. We hope you enjoyed the short introductory video narrated by Brené Brown on the importance of empathy. If you are interested, as I mentioned, the link is available in our chat box. We know that now more than ever, leaders need to dig deep and be courageous. Being brave and courageous requires empathy. As Brené Brown cited, empathy is a choice, and it requires a profound connection. I think our participants are still joining, but as we continue, please note that the video and voice functions have been disabled, but we do encourage you to participate in the Q&A. So please post your questions and comments in the chat box. In preparation for today, Tuesday Consulting recently ran 2 polls on LinkedIn. Thanks, Nicole. Firstly, we asked if 2022 might see an increase or decrease in mental health challenges. Unfortunately, the results show that 86% of respondents believe that there will be an increase in mental health challenges next year. This is obviously not a very positive outlook. In our second poll, we were curious to know if individuals felt their organizational leaders were equipped to deal with the current mental health crisis. Understandably, the majority felt that leaders were not well equipped. This is absolutely no judgment on our leaders, but rather indicates the enormous pressure on executives to address and embrace the current mental health dilemma. I'm now going to hand over to my fellow director of Tuesday Consulting, Shirley Zinn, who will introduce our panelists and facilitate our session. Shirley is a seasoned board director of several JSE-listed companies, which also provides her with an organizational view of the topic we are discussing today. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and a good afternoon and a warm welcome to all of our participants, especially to our esteemed panelists today. I'm delighted today to be back and to further this conversation on leadership and mental wellness in the workplace and how this has impacted on not only the organization, but your teams and yourselves, and how you are responding to that, especially now that we have the additional challenge of the Omicron and all of the last few days of challenges that we're facing in our various spaces. So just a warm welcome to the panelists and the participants. I would like to move immediately into introducing our esteemed panelists. The first one is Dr. Thabani Sibanda. He has obtained a BSc Honours in Psychology and an MSc in Clinical Psychology, and MPhil also focusing on conflict and conflict transformation, and a PhD. He works in private practice as a clinical psychologist. He worked in various geographies, including running multi-site community HIV and AIDS interventions in parts of Southern Africa, lectureships and consulting for local and international organizations. A former lecturer and research fellow at the University of the Witwatersrand and the University of Zimbabwe. He has published on HIV and AIDS, neuropsychology, conflict and political discourse, concepts and origins of religions, and specifically Hebraic Judaic practices. Today we welcome you, Dr. Thabani Sibanda, and we're looking forward to your insights on this conversation. Our next panelist, all the way from the UK, is Cheryl Buss. She is the CEO of APSA International, currently based in the UK. In capacity of CEO, Cheryl leads the bank's UK and Europe, US, Middle East, and China international focus, in addition to a direct responsibility for APSA securities in the UK. She joined APSA in 2008. She has 25 years of multidisciplinary banking experience across Africa and the United Kingdom. Prior to her joining APSA, Cheryl worked at Standard Chartered, where she held various roles. Cheryl is personally motivated by delivering value propositions that not only solve clients' needs, but enable growth and sustainability for both clients and the continent. Welcome to you, Cheryl. Then it is my honor also to introduce to you our next panelist is Bongi Kunene. Bongi is the Managing Director of the Banking Association of South Africa. Prior to that, she was the Pan-African Head Public Sector Banking for Standard Bank Group. She has responsibility for strategic direction of the business in 15 African countries, including South Africa. Her career has included a role as the Executive Director at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. In that capacity, she served on the board representing South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola. Bongi has served in the South African government in different capacities, including 4 years in the presidency. Welcome to you, Bongi. Then next up, we are delighted to have Nikki Bengashi with us. She is the Group Chief Operating Officer at Uber Home Loans. She has 20 years career experience in financial services, banking, and logistics. She has previously worked at Telkom, and she held senior roles at Woolworths, Financial Services, ABSA, and Transnet. She holds an engineering qualification and an MBA. A warm welcome to you, Nikki. Um, and then Karen Matabula. Karen is currently the Managing Executive Product Sales and Service Enablement at ABSA. She has worked across multiple geographies in many different businesses and has succeeded in a broad range of environments, notably in the past 17 years in banking environments. She holds an MSc. A huge welcome to our esteemed panelists. I'm really excited about the conversation today because today we are sharing the real stories of what leaders are doing, exactly what they are doing in their environments, and how it's impacting on them as leaders, and how it's impacting on them as not only professionals but personally as well. So, without saying too much, now I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give a 5-minute introduction, kind of opening comments. And then I also want to encourage you, if a question pops up in your head, to please engage through the chat box, and we will get to your questions after we have heard from each of the panelists. So I'm going to ask Cheryl Bus just to start. And Cheryl, we look forward to your opening comments. Thank you very much.
Morning, Shirley. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be on this panel. I think that it is a vastly interesting topic, and I think that it is one that consumes a lot of thoughts of colleagues, employees, managers, leaders alike across the world. Unfortunately, I don't think there are many answers in terms of how we deal with the issues at hand. But I think what needs to have an answer is the fact that mental well-being and mental issues are certainly more prevalent than we have seen, not only in society but obviously also in the workplace. If we look at the UK, there's certainly, where I'm based, there's certainly an increased anxiousness around the increase that we've seen around mental wellness, just in terms of the general population. And we see government actually now really raising concerns around the impact of COVID, impact of financial positions, impact of family positions on the back of lockdowns and the likes. And we're really seeing that impetus come through just in society, and the need for the governments to actively address what they do about it. Interestingly as well is that this also starts at very young ages, and we're seeing increased mental anxiety come through and play into children. And I'm sure around the world over, everyone has got many stories or many facts that they can share around the prevalence of mental anxiety and mental issues with children. If we shift that into the workplace, I think that that's going to touch, all of those factors are going to touch the workplace today and in future years to come. So if we look today, how's it going to impact today? Obviously, the impacts of COVID, the impacts of how you lead through, how you cope with your job, if your child is suffering. So I think that's the first piece. But then importantly, when we look to the future, is how are we going to shape the children of today to also deal with the mental stresses and strains that they are having and how they carry into their lives going forward. I think what's interesting for this topic is obviously how organizations are dealing with the various challenges. I think at ABSA, we're pleased to say that we do spend a lot of time and effort. We believe that people are our strongest asset. And so we do put a lot of focus and time into physical wellness, financial wellness, emotional and mental health. And then obviously there's a separate pillar of support that has come through because of COVID. But I think interestingly is, whilst I think that many of our employees would hopefully attest to the fact that they have felt heard and felt supported, I think that does exist. But I think as was highlighted by Wendy's comments and also by Brennan Brown, was are we seeing the issues at hand truly being dealt with by organizations, and are people equipped? And so as much as I look to how I support my own employees, what's the support that I'm actually doing for myself? How can I be the best leader? And I personally don't feel that I'm equipped to deal with the mental illness challenges and illnesses that come through in my team. And when you look at some of the stats, that you've pulled off, there's some interesting fact bases here. Around 64% of senior leaders actually suffer from mental health conditions, anxiety, stress, depression. 58% of leaders say that they find it quite challenging to be able, in their positions that they hold, to talk about mental health. And 1 in 4 people feel that there's less support for mental health at senior positions. So when you couple that anxiety and stress with the inadequacy in terms of knowing how to deal with it, I think that doesn't really post a very healthy outlook. And I think that hopefully we'll unpack that today in terms of coping mechanisms and the skills. But those summary points kind of give what I'm thinking about, and certainly the impacts on me and how I therefore impact my team and those that I try to lead. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for that. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in Canary Wharf today. As you were explaining in the earlier chat, I was just curious to give our attendees a flavour.
So obviously, well, we've been in the UK. There has certainly been a normalcy around behaviours and the likes. I think we have seen a shift in the mood past the announcements last Thursday. I think what's interesting, of course, is that with the new variant coming out, it's around the world. And really identified in South Africa. There's a lot of that in the press, which is good, because I think that some of the negative rhetoric isn't very helpful. So I think it is also good to share the rhetoric around the fact that people are saying how fantastic these scientific discoveries and what South Africa does actually do, and the discoveries are led by incredible scientists that happen to live in South Africa. And so there's a lot of positivity around that, which is good. But that being said, I think that the actions have obviously put a lot of fear and concern into the population. So we can definitely see a shift in the mood. People are worried. I went on to book my booster jab today, and certainly the NHS website is crowded out. So people are certainly taking it seriously. And then I caught the train and the tube in this morning, and it was certainly a lot quieter. Thankfully, people are wearing masks. So we did go through a state where people chose not to wear masks, where the government has now, as of this morning, implemented mandatory mask wearing. So I think that there is an air of caution. From my part, I just hope and pray that this isn't as bad as it was initially made out to be. I think this is something that's going to circle around us all the time. So let's hope that the outcome is a better one than what was initially touted for it to be.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for that. We're going to cycle back to you in the Q&A, but thank you so much for your opening comments there. I'm going to ask Bongi Kunene, I'm going to invite you just to make a few of your opening comments on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I sit in a space which represents all banks in South Africa. So in as much as BASA has employees those are not employees of the banks. That's just a starting point to frame our interaction with the industry. So maybe one first observation of how we are shaped as banks, it's a very highly regulated industry. And from time to time, we see great innovations and sometimes interventions that require banks to respond. The first point to make on those innovations is always how great it is that the industry is making these advances. At the same time, we are very much aware that for each of those, there is a human feeling of displacement. If you find better ways of doing my work with automated standards and procedures, with artificial intelligence and all the blockchain that has come to the fore now, you expect that at a human level, there's going to be feelings of anxiety with that displacement. So what it translates to at an industry body is really a push for all of us to go forward, so to lean in into these new innovations. But we do know that at the back of this, there's likely individuals who are left with doubts, left with questions, what's going to happen to me? The second issue is just internally, all of our organizations have got lots of parameters that guide human interactions among individuals. So what we see in pre-COVID days, normal interactions that would result in interpersonal conflict. These days, they could be captured in behaviors where you've got a lot of communication via emails. And because people want to reach everybody, there's a lot of copied messages that cover one and all. And sometimes there's an escalation of matters that just blows up, not because the problem could not have been solved, but because it involves so many people. And we are seeing those interpersonal dynamics also in a platform such as BASA, where either we are talking how we respond to regulators, or we are crafting something new, that issues can just move beyond what was intended. So in terms of, firstly, personal, how do I respond to these? Because we do know that these parameters we're talking about, they wouldn't really include concern about mental health. I'm going to give you an example of how I've dealt very recently with a flare-up which included regulators. The banks got a letter, which is a communication letter. It didn't go well because the intent behind that letter was ill-defined. Yet it was going to have a direct impact on bank operations in many levels, including decisions that they have to take at a distribution channel level. So my reaction was, I really do know that this regulator, they are always a little bit, they are very balanced. So in starting a conversation with them, I thought it was really necessary to inject a sense of humor. It was a grave situation. And where I sit, as you can see, there's a light directly ahead of me. So there's this nice glow to my face. And people normally say, wow, you look very healthy. And I know it means that I'm looking sometimes very shiny. And because I am raising grandchildren, I do tell the story that sometimes, because we work from 7 until very late, when I'm running them to the car, I make sure that they don't have too much Vaseline on their face. If there is, I wipe it off and share it with them. So the clothes that you see could just be the liberal application of Vaseline.
That's
It
wonderful,
really
Bongi.
does.
I'm loving what you're saying. We're going to come back to some of it. If you can just, I'm just aware of the time, just 1 minute or so, just to give your main thrust here quickly.
Okay, the point that I'm making is what we need to be, or where we say, what do you need me to be, comes in short, focused conversations.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bongi. We're going to come back to some of this because I think we need to explore this a little more deeply. I just want to move on to the next panelist, Nikki Benkash. Nikki, have you got a couple of thoughts for us in just a few minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm going to try and be very short. I don't want to take too much time of your Q&A. So I think for me, the one thing, firstly, I think I need to recognize Tuesday for actually having these conversations in the first place. I think I haven't seen so many companies, or at least haven't been exposed to many of these conversations. And I think the starting point is actually just having them, so that we normalize. I see a lot of that on social media, normalize mental health, and I think that's quite important for me. So I really have had the opportunity of being exposed to working from big corporates to medium and small organizations, and I think one of the things that I'm noticing in dealing with such things is that sometimes we do tend to have those conversations as if there's one solution for all. And I think for me today, the focus I really want to caution against, and also maybe emphasize, is that how do we start tailoring for different organizations, settings, and individuals, and cultural backgrounds. And I think that's another thing that we totally underestimate when we talk about these conversations. And I think, and I hope, and I truly hope that that comes into the conversation today. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you so much. Thanks very, very much, Nikki. We will cycle back to you on that one as well. And then Karen Matabula, over to you for a few minutes of opening comments.
Thanks so much, Shirley. I think for me, the biggest positive takeaway about this topic is that organizations have realized that mental wellness is an everybody and everything issue. It is not a topic just when we want to talk about mental illness. And I think that that's an incredibly positive realization and shift, and you can see it in the manner in which organizations are dealing with the impact of the pandemic in a much more holistic sort of way. I think also the pandemic has amplified our strengths and vulnerabilities, both as at individual level, as leaders or members of a team, but also as teams. And certainly that's, I think, quite an important thing to bear in mind when one thinks about the work from home scenarios of different individuals, the fact that we are connecting virtually, that tactile connection that we have become used to in the workplace is missing. And so the ability to demonstrate empathy and communicate effectively becomes much more amplified with respect to how effective it is in terms of not just the workplace, but interpersonal communication. I think sort of for me, what I take away from this experience, and this is across the base, whether one is talking about colleagues who operate in call center type roles, who are working from home, or whether one is talking about professionals, that our ability to adapt to change, which has been brought about by the pandemic, when the end game is not in control. We are not in control of the end game of this pandemic. It is certainly an unfolding story. And so that has in many ways challenged our concept of change and how we land change and how we manage change in the workplace. And certainly from a leadership perspective, I think that is, for me, the biggest challenge, because at the same time as dealing with the need to connect with colleagues just for the sake of connecting, you are simultaneously dealing with bereavements, you are simultaneously dealing with all of the vulnerabilities that emerge in the context. And I think we've all experienced the sort of 24/7 switched on phenomenon, which is hugely taxing. So I think for me as a leader, and as I think about what leadership means as a consequence of this, there is a huge amount of work to be done to figure that out, and to support leaders in terms of this constantly changing, ambiguous journey that we are on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen, for those insights and for sharing that. We're also going to come back to you because I know you've got some more to tell us. And I would like to now cross over to Dr. Thabani Sibanda just to welcome him and just to hear some of his opening thoughts on what we've just been discussing. Doesn't sound.
Can you hear me?
Here we are. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this insightful meeting. I will walk away from this place having learned a lot. Just to be, because I was checking the conversations coming from the previous speakers, I realize now as we think that the experience that I've had, at least through the employees who become my patients, is that their employers would track the mental health of their employees, and they want to know exactly what's happening. And they are very much alert. They will talk through the employee and seek consent to speak to me. And we have a chart, obviously, that does not disclose things that are sensitive, but to assist the employee to be adaptive at work with the condition that they might be presenting with. Then we also have employers or say employers who are hands-off. Once the person is off-site, they are in hospital or admitted in hospital, or they are booked off, they have nothing to do with the employee. They only welcome the employee when they come back with a medical certificate. We also have employees who certainly do not know what is going on. Employers, sorry, who do not know what is going on. And they are completely ambivalent. They are non-responsive. That's another category of employers. We have employers again, which I would say the fourth category, who are interested in tracking their employees, but for their benefit, for the benefit of terminating employment in order to reduce disease burden for the company, right? So for me, maybe let me stop here, and obviously we'll talk about other things later if there's an opportunity to come through.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thabani Sibanda, for those opening comments. We are going to start the engagement from the floor, and while we get ready for people to ask their questions, I think our panelists have raised some absolutely critical points in their opening comments, and I'm sure there are many more questions that we have now than we've ever actually had before. I mean, we were on the cusp of getting ready to go into hybrid work, and now we don't know what that holds. We still have high performance expectations from people. We have struggling economies. We have rising costs, and we want to put humanness at the center of our strategy and placing the onus of human at the center of everything we do. And the question is, how are we managing this for our teams, for our organization, for ourselves? And this kind of, new, the new news that we've had in the last few days is creating unprecedented anxiety in people, with this additional complexity of a new variant of concern. So the conversation is very timeous, and would love to hear as many thoughts as we possibly can on what you're doing, what you're advising, what the impact have been of what you're already doing, and how we sustain ourselves over the coming weeks and months. So Wendy, I'm going to open it up to the floor to just see if there are any questions, but I would like to hear perhaps from the panelists just a few thoughts on your where we at right this minute. What is somebody said earlier that I'm not equipped to deal with this. It was Cheryl, or I'm feeling very vulnerable right now. And asking leaders, what are we doing from a leadership perspective in the current circumstances? So maybe while we just get the questions together, I'm going to ask any of the panelists just to quickly comment on where they are at right now in response to the last few days, or maybe the last few months of the situation unfolding. We are on day 613, I think it is, since March last year. So it's been an ongoing, evolving change and challenge. So I just quickly want to ask the one or two of the panelists, and then we will go to the Q&A. Wendy, thank you.
I can share, Shelley. I think one of the things for me that I've found, because I also saw the question, how are leaders dealing with this? I've been very fortunate that I've had a period of 2 years where I've gotten a break out of corporate. And I've just come back now within the last 6 months. And since I've joined, I certainly struggled with working virtually. I haven't had an experience in that. So that is something that I had to deal with. But one thing that I really wanted to talk about is the opportunity that I've had in terms of my resilience to deal with this, because I've only had 6 months to deal with it, and the benefit that has had that back with the teams that I work with. I found that the one thing that works well, and people probably still underestimate the power of it, is the moving from knowing people to understanding people. And it sounds like such a simple concept, but it's actually makes a lot of difference, because knowing is just about, I know facts, I know you're Shelley, I know you live in a certain, you're in Joburg, I know you related to Tuesday Consulting. But when I move to understanding, that's when I really try and use those facts to analyze and place them in a context of, to form a bigger picture of who you are and why you react in certain ways. And I found that the power of moving from knowing to understanding has helped so many of my teams to firstly relate with me, because then I offer that back. I offer the understanding back by sharing who I am, has offered a lot of open room for them to share what they're going through, and also for them to speak openly about everything about them that's even outside of work. And that understanding that context of who they are, why they're doing this, and where they're at has helped a lot in not only increasing the understanding of mental health, but also improving it, but actually helps in productivity, because I think sometimes organizations don't make the link of focusing to their bottom line. So that's just one thing that I think is such a simple concept, moving from knowing to understanding, and the impact that it has not only on the people, the teams and the culture, and the ease for leadership, because it certainly has made it easier for me to integrate back, but just on productivity that I've seen in our organization. So that's something that I just wanted to share with everyone.
Thank you so much. That is a very powerful concept, and I think a lot of the speakers also alluded to that in various ways. I think, you know, Bongi also talked about the importance of communication that doesn't induce anxiety, and the way we say things, and moving from knowing to understanding. I think it's a lovely way of kind of inviting people to speak with you, and because you're sharing of who you are, and I think you're making yourself also vulnerable in the process, invites other people to step step into a conversation. So thank you very much for sharing that. Maybe one more comment from any one of the other panelists before we go to the questions.
Okay, I can come in at this stage. I think, Shirley, as a leader, we are entrusted with enforcing performance and making sure that we maintain a particular standard. What I think helps is also enforcing performance which relates to pause. Because when people are not together, the anxiety to be seen to be delivering, the imperative of being productive at all times may drive people to be working for these long hours. It's been quite important for me to have conversations with people. Pause. If it's not important, don't do it on the weekend. If you've just had an addition to the family, you are a father, take paternity leave. And that had to be wired because it wasn't there in our HR policy. So we were a little bit behind, but that introduction of saying leave is applicable to everyone was something that we had to be intentional about. Take your leave and pause.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Bongi. You would think that that is something that people would do, but it's been a challenge. Especially from where I sit, I can see that that is a challenge in many organizations. So I'm pleased to hear that you're saying pause and take your leave, and particularly calling out paternity leave in this particular case. Okay, Wendy, do we have any comments or questions in the chat box?
Yes, Shirley, it's Sulu here. We do have some questions, I think quite related to some of the comments that the panelists have made. I'll just read them out for you. The first question is, how are leaders dealing or managing teams in a virtual environment and managing mental issues as they're impacting on performance or productivity? And also, how are they impacting organizational culture within the organizations? And then just moving on, should I mention the second one, Shirley, or should I wait for the
maybe give a second one, Tsolo, and then we can hear from the panelists.
Okay. So the second question is, we've seen a number of companies placing emphasis on mental health and prioritizing wellness. It would be good to understand moving forward what leaders may want to do differently in the future.
Thank you so much.
Perfect.
All about leaders here. So I'm opening it up to any of the panelists if you'd like to comment.
Surely I can come in. I can come in if you like. So yeah, I mean, it's been a real challenge, right? I think that whilst there are certainly positives for virtual, and I think that there's been positives for virtual often in home dynamics and in family dynamics, because I think maybe there's been more broad sharing across family and realizing around, and I take the lens of a female and balancing work and life and children and all the rest of it. I think that there's definitely been this understanding of broader family dynamics and actually both playing a role together. But I think at the same time, I think that where we've seen some struggle is really on the youngsters and those trying to make a mark and those trying to break into their careers and learn. And I think, you know, in many instances, I used to diss the water cooler chats because you'd often see people, you know, huddling around the water cooler or making coffee again, and yet I realized that that is so vital and so missed now, because the information, the learning, the connectivity, the togetherness, the sense of a team that actually is created around the water cooler is something that I don't think has been recognized. So, you know, when we what we're looking to do is work definitely from a hybrid perspective. I think what we have tried to do is give our people, especially in London, we're a smaller office, we're only 30, but giving people the option of saying, can you come in twice a week? And the rest of the time, try and balance your time. And when people do come into the office, we're trying to do our meetings together in that time so that there's that face-to-face connectivity, which is extremely powerful. And it really struck me in a meeting that I had, a face-to-face meeting last week, where that connectivity we had it with our chair, and that connectivity was just so much better, seeing him on a face-to-face basis. So I think that we're just trying to balance between the two. And then I think in terms of the mental issues, it's a challenge, right? Because as much as you want to hear, as much as you want to be empathetic, as much as you want to be understanding and communicate, and you should be, I think there's also a sense of nervousness, right? So let's be open and frank. As much as I want to hear from my team and get them to open up, I'm also a little bit anxious and scared as to what they may tell me as a leader, because what if I can't deal with it? What if I send them down the wrong path? What if I advise incorrectly? So I think from a leadership perspective, there's that challenge and that dynamic that we need to bridge between getting people to open up, being vulnerable yourself, but having that fear of advising in the wrong way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shirley.
Yeah, that is a real serious dilemma that we have, because we really don't know for sure what the answers might be to some of the questions that people might be putting to us. Any other thoughts from the other panelists on these questions?
I think that the mental health aspects are coming more and more out in terms of an employee working from home. What I encounter most of the time is that people are struck with loneliness. They feel lonely. They are used to being in a group of people. Some of the people don't have family at all. So being at work, it provides a certain degree of companionship, which they don't have anymore. And some of these people don't have relationships that would provide the necessary comfort they need. So it becomes a problem. And I've also seen increased drinking in terms of during working hours, where people just spend, a couple of hours drinking. And that also factors into the working long hours kind of scenario. That someone will spend 3 hours drinking, and then all of a sudden they realize they have a task to take care of. They jump on the task, and they end up finishing at midnight. And then there's also the aspect of working while I'm in my blankets, because I'm at home, I can just do stuff, and they fall asleep in that process and wake up late. Also affecting the aspect of long hours scenario. So now I think the company needs to start looking at dealing with these issues. My sense that company policies will take time to respond to things that they don't see. They will respond only on the behaviors that are evident at work, but what is unseen is difficult to work with. So that is an area where one has to look at in terms of company policy. Knowing your employees and understanding them as individuals. These are two things. And my sister was pointed out that you need to know, not only know the person, but understand them. The policies must reflect the idea that they know a human being, they know a people, they know their employees, but also they must understand individuals. Because any person who presents at work presents as an individual, not in a group, even though they will function within that group. This also relates to mental health policies, which I have an insight into it because I've been before in a position to develop mental health policies for organizations. that some of the mental health policies are generic. They tend to be generic. They are adapted from one company to another, and they are expected to speak to that company when they are not. You cannot, for example, take a generic policy from one bank to another bank. It must be adaptive, right? The other aspect of it, obviously, will relate to how, whether the organization has an alert system that provides signals as to what's going on with their staff, whether supervisors and managers are aware of it, and what system you use to track your employees. It has to be new, depending on the organization that you're running. I think for now, that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Those are very insightful thoughts, and I think there's some serious realities that we have to question ourselves on in terms of knowing and understanding the loneliness, the alcohol problems, the working in bed and falling asleep issues, and the lack of sleep that people also experience, and what that leads to. Thank you very much, Dr. Sibanda, for illuminating that there. I heard somebody starting to say something. Can I just see who was speaking? Was it one of the panelists? So are there any further questions on the chat room?
Yes, Shadi, the next question says, can you comment on how your business is revising or reviewing your onboarding and integration program for new employees, as this can cause anxieties?
Onboarding programs. Okay, thank you. Okay, I wonder, Karin, we haven't heard from you, so I'm just going to call upon you quickly to give some insights on that.
Thank you, Shirley. I think it's quite an important question because the way in which we look after talent in our organization is as much a function of how we actually bring a colleague into the organization, what that experience is, and how they are set up for success, as it is about managing the talent of the organization that is already in the organization. And the two are not unrelated. So I think for us, what we've done is design very specific induction programs that deal with different contexts. So we obviously have people who are in the regions who are, customer facing. We have contact center people. We have professional environments in the product space and credit and so on. And it has required of us that we spend a lot more time in the induction process on ways of work. Because they are a lot less obvious in a virtual setting. And one of the key elements of that induction program around ways of work is creating time to check in just for the sake of it. So there are lots of check-ins and meetings and all sorts of things on Teams where people are learning stuff or talking about operational stuff or talking about the business. But creating that time every day, which is just about checking in, has proved to be an incredibly valuable mechanism, not just for people to start to feel comfortable with each other, because obviously if they're new to the organization, that's a barrier that one has to break down, but also just in terms of creating understanding of each person's circumstance. And being able to create a support. I mean, for me, it's been remarkable to see the wisdom that comes from a group of people who just connect to say, these are my circumstances, this is what I'm experiencing, this is how I feel. And other people, resonating with that and saying, I have exactly the same sort of problem, or someone else saying, really, how can I help? So I think that's been, one of the important things. But it has required a completely different approach to induction, which is not about just, what are the products and services, what are the value propositions, what are the operational requirements, but actually about how do we work together and what are those ways of work. At the heart of it, that is a culture shift. And once again, relies very heavily on the leader who is required to orchestrate that process and stay with it. Not just sort of, be there on the first day and disappear, but on a day-to-day basis, stay with that program and make sure that people are landed in the organization with the right experience.
Thank you so much for that, Karen. That's it's very, very insightful. I know that our hour is running down very, very fast, as it usually does. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists. We have about 5 minutes left, and we have 5 of you. I'm going to ask you to, in 45 seconds, make a final closing comment that will encourage, inspire, and just give some hope to all of our attendees here today. I'm going to start with you, Karen, and I'm just going to work my way through the list. Okay.
Gosh, thank you, Shirley. I want to go back to a comment I made at the beginning, which is that mental wellness is about everybody and everything. And the fact of the matter is that we have been dealing with this pandemic, for better or for worse, for almost 2 years now. And I think it's a constant state of adaptability. But I think as leaders, the more that we recognize that every person's context in this virtual world of work has a much more substantial impact on that person's ability to work and their mental fitness to work than if they were just coming to the office every day. And I think that that's an extremely important thing for us to dwell on as leaders and really recognize that fact.
Thank you so much, Karen, for those insights. Dr. Sibanda.
Just to summarize what I was saying, I would suggest that policies need to be reviewed. Mental health factors need to be issues need to be factored in induction, performance appraisals, and that there has to be an establishment of alert systems within organizations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Tabani Sibanda. Cheryl Buss.
Thanks, Shirley. So for me, I think that irrelevant of COVID, wellness issues are here to stay. I think as leaders, and we open ourselves up to listen, to be empathetic and to hear, and to ensure that we show vulnerability as well. We also need to stop and pause and think about ourselves as leaders, think about the tools that we can equip ourselves with, and just think about also protecting ourselves through the journey as well. So as much as we want to, embrace our teams and those that we lead and those around us, we also need to give ourselves a hug as well. And if you don't know or you feel anxious around what you're dealing with, reach out. It's okay. And no doubt there are sharing groups where there are others similar to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Bungie. Bungie.
Thank you. So let me speak for the people who are new in different organizations, because that's really difficult to get in this COVID times. You get into a space and you don't have a sense of what the team was like before you started. So to try to focus yourself, I would say it's a matter of trying to find a point of cohesion with that new team, but also learning the culture. The advantage you have when you are new in these times is that if the culture doesn't suit you because you've got enough distance with your colleagues, you can afford to be very individualistic and cite your own terms in terms of how do you become successful. And lastly, I would just urge all of us to be really gentle.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bungie. I appreciate that. And Nikki.
I think mine, sorry, thanks, Shelly. Mine is that you are not alone. You're really not alone. I think most of us sometimes when we're going through a lot, when we're dealing with stuff, we always imagine that everyone else is having it easy, or they won't relate. I think social media is sometimes very dangerous in that aspect, that we're seeing only a portion of a person's life and we assume that is the totality of their lives. You are not alone. Whatever you're going through, someone else has gone through. I heard someone say something that there's nothing that's new that's being invented. So, someone has thought about something at some point, whatever you come up with. It's just that there's one person who raised their hand. So whatever you're going through, someone has gone through it before. Just talk about it, share it, find your people. I always say find your kind of people, people who relate to you, people who understand who you are, understand your background, and normally within an environment, if you find those people, then it'll be easy to share what you're going through. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think for leaders, going back to the move from knowing to understanding, take time to understand who the people you work with, who people who work for you. Understand who Nikki is, what matters to her, what will make this journey easy for her. It's not the same thing that will work for Wendy. I certainly had the advantage of having experienced that, having joined corporate now, that I had a leader who actually made the effort to say what will work for you if you haven't experienced this virtual working. And one of the things that I asked for was that allow for an office space for me, because I'm not used to working from home. So give me that for 6 months. And he absolutely allowed that for me because I'm working from Joburg. So understand people are individuals and try and create solutions that cater for that as much as possible.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for all of those insights. I think we would want to give a virtual hand to our amazing and esteemed panelists for their insights and for sharing so freely and openly, and such wonderful gems and pearls of wisdom and encouragement for us as well. Thank you so much for your time and your commitment to this event today. And I know we're a little bit over time, and I want to just hand over to Wendy to do the formal closing. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to work with you.
Thank you, Shirley. I would also like to sincerely thank our panelists and our guests for joining us today. I'd also like to quickly thank the Tuesday Consulting team who all contributed to the success of the webinar. And please note that the link to the webinar will be available shortly on our website. So if you want to review it or go back to it, it will be there. Unfortunately, we had far less guests than we expected. We had 60 registered guests and obviously not as many join, but I think that's indicative of the time. People get other meetings put into their diaries, and then they have to deprioritize obviously what they really want to do, which is attend the webinar, but at least they can review it via our website following today. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. And if you are taking some leave, have happy holidays, and we will see you all in the new year. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.